Thank you, Senator Kane, Ranking Member Risch, Secretary Blinken.
Senator.
Before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge a young man, Army Staff Sergeant Ryan Knaus. Ryan's a Tennessean, one of the 13 service members who lost his life at the airport in Kabul, trying to rescue and save others. My heart goes out to he and his family and the tragic loss associated with this evacuation. And regarding this evacuation, I agree with Senator Barrasso. For President Biden to call this an extraordinary success is beyond the pale when we leave Americans, when we leave our allies, when we leave those that have helped us behind. And I've also just been over to visit with our allies in the UK and at NATO, and their sense of surprise and enragement is palpable. We have a very significant failure that's taken place here, a failure of global proportion. And it's placed our allies in the position of questioning America's resolve, of questioning our nation's integrity. And frankly, they put us in a situation where they're questioning whether we're a reliable partner. Our reputation as a nation, I think, has been put at risk as a result of the failed evacuation here. And our job now is to get to the bottom of this failure as a committee. This failure that's left the world a more dangerous place for the United States, for our allies, for those that depend on us. It's also armed our enemies like never before, and it's emboldened our strategic adversaries. There must be accountability. Secretary Blinken, my office and other congressional offices have heard rumors regarding potential cabinet resignations over the situation in Afghanistan. So I want to ask you, have you submitted your resignation regarding this issue?
I have not.
The lack of accountability here, the lack of accountability in this administration is shocking to me. I'd like to turn to another question regarding the intelligence that we've relied upon. In an internal report given to the State Department by Embassy Kabul on August the 16th, there was warning of a breach of the Kabul airport. It said, I quote, "A breach cannot be fully prevented at current force levels." Mr. Secretary, did you see that report?
I'm sorry, can you tell me the date again, Senator?
August the 16th, a report given to Embassy Kabul, an internal report from Embassy Kabul to the State Department, saying that a breach at the airport cannot be fully prevented at current force levels.
I can't tell you whether I saw that specific report, but that's exactly why the President had on standby 6,000 forces to be able to deploy immediately into Afghanistan, into the airport, in case the airport was in jeopardy, and that's exactly what we did.
Well, this, the force levels being insufficient, I think, was a significant reason for concern, something that in a plan of action, I think should have been accounted for certainly earlier. And going to the NEO plan, I'd like to cover that with you for a few minutes. The non-combatant evacuation operational plan for Afghanistan would be a plan on how we evacuate American civilians from a foreign country should a dangerous situation arise.
That's correct.
Prior to turning over the Bagram Air Base on July 2nd, did the NEO plan to evacuate Americans have the Bagram Air Base as a critical element of its strategy?
The critical element for any evacuation was actually the airport in Kabul, known as HKIA, because, as you know, Senator, Bagram is about 40 miles from Kabul. To the extent that the population that you're seeking to evacuate was mostly in Kabul, the airport by far most convenient to them would be the airport in Kabul, HKIA.
A civilian airport in a neighborhood that's much more difficult to protect than an airport the size of Bagram with 2 runways and the ability to land and lift off significant airlift capacity. I'm frankly quite shocked that our NEO plan would have had no inclusion of the Bagram Air Base, but if I understand you correctly, it did not include Bagram.
The plan focused on the airport in Kabul.
I wonder how the evacuation plan was updated, Mr. Secretary, as things began to change on the ground. What was the process that you deployed there?
Senator, through the course of the spring and summer, we reviewed all of these plans, different contingencies, including the NEO plan. Of course, the element that no one anticipated, as we've discussed on numerous occasions, was the rapid collapse of the Afghan government and the Afghan security forces in the space of about 11 days. Having said that, we had plans in place to do the two critical things that we did. We were able to evacuate our embassy, all its personnel, destroy sensitive materials, get people to the airport in 48 hours, and in many cases, much less than that. Second, as I mentioned, the President ordered that there be a standby force in place to make sure that HKIA, the airport in Kabul, was secured. Planes could come in, planes could take off, and we had a secure facility. And we did that in the course of about 72 hours.
Back to the NEO discussion. In an August 14th briefing, the Pentagon spokesman John Kirby denied that there was a NEO operation in Afghanistan at that point. But 2 days later, on the 16th, he belatedly admitted there was a NEO operation going on. And so I'm curious, Mr. Secretary, what date did the administration actually decide to execute the NEO plan, and when did they begin to actively evacuate all Americans and allies?
I believe, Senator, it was triggered by the collapse of the government and the security forces.
Who would have made the decision to execute the NEO?
Ultimately, the President would be asked for his decision approval to do that based on the recommendation of the different government agencies involved.
Is that what happened in this case?
I believe that's right. Yes, sir.
You know, oversight isn't a simple check-the-box exercise. It requires getting to the bottom of what's come to be the greatest U.S. foreign policy disaster, at least in my lifetime. And, Mr. Chairman, we need more hearings on this Afghanistan withdrawal failure. I'd also like to say this. Leadership requires owning one's mistakes. And leadership requires introspection and a commitment to achieve what's right. What we've witnessed here has been a failure of leadership. What it is has been a trust-driven spin cycle. It's one that's deflected blame, and it's one that shamed us as a nation. It's time to lead.
Senator, if I could just say briefly in response.
Please be brief.
Yes.
If you would.
I am responsible for the decisions I make. I'm responsible for the actions of my department. I'm responsible for learning any lessons that flowed from those decisions or those actions. And I'm also responsible to holding myself accountable to you and through you to the American people, which is exactly what I'm doing here today, what I've been doing these past weeks in repeated conversations and briefings with members of Congress, both the Senate and the House, and what I will continue to do going forward. And we can all draw our own conclusions from that. I respect yours. I may disagree with them, but that's exactly the process that I'm engaged in and that we're engaged in, and we will continue to do that going forward.
Well, my constituents expect that sort of accountability as well, particularly the veterans that serve in Tennessee and across the nation that have reached out to me that are absolutely heartbroken about what's gone on. There's been loss of life, there's been loss of treasure. We've now armed terrorists at a level that I've never expected. Our allies are more proximate to this threat than we are. They could not have been more frustrated with me when I spoke with them. They're concerned that we now have a threat level that we've never seen before, and we've got to find ways to work together with them to address that. And I'll look to you for accountability on that as well as we move forward, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Van Hollen.